Coveted R.J. Barrett in trade talks with the Knicks recently. He had been a big part of what they were seeking. It might be tough for the Knicks and the Jazz to make a deal without R.J. Barrett. The deal could still happen without R.J. Barrett. It just means the Knicks, I think, would have to be willing to go to a place they hadn't been willing to go. When you talk about draft compensation and first-round picks.
This past week, I needed to take some personal time off. If you followed me on Twitter and Instagram, you'd know some stuff going on behind the scenes, which also resulted in me no longer having my hair. And no, it's not because I was inspired by Alex Caruso. Well, I kind of was, hence why I'm wearing the headband. But in this 1 week, man, I missed the Los Angeles Lakers trading for Patrick Beverley. I missed Chet Holmgren being out for the entire season with a Lisfranc injury, which, by the way, I'm really excited. My brother is actually specializing in medical school on athlete injuries, so soon we'll be able to get an expert to analyze all this stuff for you guys. All the way to Kevin Durant rescinding his trade request. And now that I'm back, I just wanted to start off with some fresh news. And the freshest news we have, and the most likely scenario where we could see a superstar player get traded, is Donovan Mitchell getting traded from the Utah Jazz, potentially to a new team, most likely the New York Knicks. And I've been keeping you guys up to date on this, but it seems like things have gotten very complicated as of late. So before we get to the content, man, we're giving away copies of NBA 2K23 on my Twitter and on my Instagram account. I highly recommend you turn on my notifications for both, because I'm going to be just dropping codes at random in addition to announcing legitimate giveaway winners on Twitter and on Instagram for NBA 2K23. Now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Donovan Mitchell to the New York Knicks just seems to be a situation that makes way too much sense. I mean, usually in scenarios where teams want to acquire superstar players, they are either trying to push for said player despite having no assets whatsoever, or they're in a situation where they have so many assets that the original team that has said superstar player wants to completely pillage this team and take them for everything they're worth. And in the New York Knicks case, it seems like that's the type of team they are. I mean, the New York Knicks could offer so many different young assets, from Obi Toppin to Emmanuel Quickley to RJ Barrett. Well, maybe not RJ Barrett. We're going to get to that in a sec. They can match the salary cap space with Julius Randle. They have all of their draft picks. They can, without a doubt, do what it takes to go ahead and trade for Donovan Mitchell. And ultimately, it seems like that's what the New York Knicks have been trying to do over the past couple of weeks. As a matter of fact, I can't think of another team that is more likely to achieve this than the New York Knicks. And the Utah Jazz are clearly in a rebuild. I mean, they traded Royce O'Neal for a first-round pick from the Brooklyn Nets. They traded Patrick Beverley for Talon Horton-Tucker. They traded Rudy Gobert for way too much assets, in my opinion. And it seems like they're headed down a very healthy rebuild. I mean, with Quinn Snyder leaving and having a superstar of Donovan Mitchell's caliber still on the roster, all that's left is to clearly try to trade Donovan Mitchell, and that's no surprise to anyone. What surprised people is the fact that the New York Knicks threw the Utah Jazz a bit of a curveball. You see, RJ Barrett is eligible for a rookie contract extension, and the question is, if the Utah Jazz would want to trade for RJ Barrett, how much would they be willing to pay RJ Barrett? It seems like that is now off the table, because the New York Knicks threw the Utah Jazz a gigantic curveball a few nights ago by finalizing an extension with RJ Barrett. Now, I'm going to tell you guys about the extension before I tell you how intense and how close this trade actually was. And it might drive some Knicks fans crazy, but let's jump into this article. So, RJ Barrett finalized an extension with the New York Knicks, and this complicates the pursuit of Utah Jazz's Donovan Mitchell. So, New York Knicks guard RJ Barrett is finalizing a 4-year rookie contract extension that could be worth up to $120 million, according to his agent Bill Duffy of BDA Sports and WME Sports, complicating the franchise's offseason pursuit of Utah Jazz All-Star Donovan Mitchell. Barrett's deal, which makes him the youngest $100 million player in Knicks history at 22 years old, causes several weeks of trade discussions for Donovan Mitchell between New York and Utah, and forces the two organizations, if they choose, to start over talks with significantly different considerations because of the poison pill provision now in Barrett's deal. Before I get to the poison pill provision in Barrett's deal, I just wanted to make you guys clear clear that the New York Knicks are currently paying Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, and RJ Barrett $341 million. Yeah, I'm gonna let that sink in for a little bit. It's not necessarily a core that terrifies opposing teams in the Eastern Conference, especially considering the fact that the New York Knicks kind of fell short of expectations last year after having a prior season that looked very promising. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it looks like Julius Randle just got the bag and just kind of like coasted for the rest of the season. I mean, Jalen Brunson could end up working out and that contract could look good as the salary cap increases, and I think that's what Leon Rose was trying to do with that contract. And you could say the same with RJ Barrett, but this clearly takes away from the New York Knicks' primary objective of trying to trade for Donovan Mitchell. So you might be wondering,
Mike, how could this be?
well, check this out. New York Knicks president of basketball operations Leon Rose set a Monday night deadline with Utah to reach an agreement on a trade for Donovan Mitchell, or the Knicks would commit to the Barrett extension, sources said. So it seems like it's just one gigantic game of chicken. I think the Jazz want way too much from the Knicks still, and the Knicks just don't want to give up too many of their assets for Donovan Mitchell because then they won't be able to build around Donovan Mitchell. So while the Jazz and Knicks trade talks intensified and the gap on deal points that included Barrett in the package tightened over the weekend and into Monday, there remained a gulf on reaching a trade for Mitchell. Once the Knicks and Jazz exhausted discussions on Monday night, Rose and Duffy finalized the extension eligible to players out of the 2019 NBA draft class. Barrett's deal ends a remarkable 23-year drought for the Knicks. He's the franchise's first draft pick to agree to a multi-year contract extension after his deal since Charlie Ward in 1999. Man, that is actually hilarious. I didn't know that personally. I didn't know that the Knicks missed out on that many of their picks or traded away that many of their picks that they hit on before offering them a contract extension in this scenario. So it goes into a little bit more depth about the trade talks, and this is where I think Knicks fans are going to start to lose their minds a little bit. So the Knicks did include RJ Barrett in trade proposals for Donovan Mitchell, which is why the process to complete the extension lasted several additional weeks. So if you bear in mind, Zion Williamson got paid a very, very long time ago. I mean, way earlier in the offseason. You're seeing multiple other draft classmates of RJ Barrett getting contract extensions as well. So yeah, it is kind of late for him at this point, and kudos to RJ Barrett for staying professional throughout the entire process. Barrett was a staple of several trade variations discussed, but hurdles remained Monday about the total of unprotected first-round picks in the deal and the inclusion of Knicks guard Quentin Grimes. Now, if you remember, I told you guys in our last video that the New York Knicks really like Quentin Grimes, and they aren't really willing to trade him. Nevertheless, the Jazz greatly valued Barrett as part of any Donovan Mitchell deal with New York, and a deal without him would require the Knicks to relinquish far more draft assets than they've shown a willingness to do. Once the Knicks committed to the Barrett's extension, management became resigned to the fact that there's a much more difficult path to an offseason deal to acquire Donovan Mitchell. Nevertheless, neither Utah nor New York is ruling out restarting the talks before the start of training camps in late September. So it seems like once again, they're gonna take a little bit of a hiatus before re-engaging in trade discussions. And honestly, if you're Utah at this point, it really depends on what you want. Are you trying to get rid of Donovan Mitchell as soon as possible so you guys could be a full-on tank fest for Victor Wembanyama this upcoming season? Or do you hold on to Donovan Mitchell until you get a good offer that you just simply cannot refuse and then pull the trigger on that offer? Besides, I've been discussing a trade on and off since early July. Out of the 179 players in NBA history who've had the poison pill provision, only one, Devin Harris in 2008, was moved. So for trade purposes, the poison pill is computed with a formula that would require the Knicks' outgoing salary for a Barrett trade at $10.9 million, but require the incoming salary for a team acquiring him to be $26.2 million. The restriction will be lifted next offseason on July 1st. So for Barrett to be included in a trade with the Jazz, the New York Knicks would need to find a third team with salary cap space to redirect Evan Fournier's $37 million contract. So you might be wondering who would be willing to take on such a horrible contract. Well, a very popular team that is coming up in these trade discussions is the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, the Los Angeles Lakers are rumored consistently, and I think they're always going to be rumored, even once we get to the regular season, if Russell Westbrook stays on the Los Angeles Lakers, to try to trade Russell Westbrook by any means. There's the rumor that the Lakers traded for Patrick Beverley. Patrick Beverley and Russell Westbrook don't like each other, although they came out and publicly said that they spoke to one another and are excited to play alongside each other. There's always that possibility. So there are some trade trades that could actually be made around Donovan Mitchell in this case. I mean, the Lakers could offer Russell Westbrook and their 2 future first-round picks and get Julius Randle and Evan Fournier in return. The Knicks could get Bojan Bogdanovic and Donovan Mitchell. Another scenario is the Lakers would be trading for Derrick Rose, Evan Fournier, and Bojan Bogdanovic. The Knicks would get Donovan Mitchell, and of course the Jazz would get 2 Laker future firsts and 5 Knicks future firsts. And then the final scenario, and I don't know if this would be my favorite, but the Lakers would get Mike Conley, Julius Randle, and Cam Reddish in this 3-team trade with the Utah Jazz and the New York Knicks. Ultimately, do I think it's the best trade for the Lakers? I mean, it sounds like you're trading Russell Westbrook's horrible contract, which is only going to be really affecting you this year, for significantly worse salary that you have to deal with for the future years. Ultimately, I can't see the Los Angeles Lakers being willing to take on a contract like Julius Randle's or Evan Fournier's in this scenario. So I think this is just the New York Knicks saying that we're tired of going back and forth and us getting nowhere. Clearly, we're not on the same page in regards to how many unprotected first-round picks you should be giving up for Donovan Mitchell. The Jazz are clearly falling into that trap of, hey, you have a ton of unprotected first-round picks. We have a superstar player in his prime. We want pretty much you to gut out all of your assets in order to trade for him. So I can understand both sides. Danny Ainge has a history of completely screwing over whatever team that he is trading with. I mean, going all the way back to the Brooklyn Nets trade of 2013, where he traded Kevin Garnett, Jason Terry, and Paul Pierce to the Brooklyn Nets and pretty much set up the Boston Celtics for another decade-long run as a result of it. As a matter of fact, Danny Ainge's reputation of being willing to screw over people was so bad that I think that's ultimately the reason why he had to leave the Boston Celtics at the end of it. So let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about all this. Do you think the New York Knicks made the right move, or do you think they were a little too impatient and decided to commit to the wrong guy? Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.